Now welcome to another lightning response video where this time the question comes to us from some guy 9070 who asked, "Hey Thor, I was curious to know if Captain Rex ever learned the truth about Anakin becoming Darth Vader. I've seen some conflicting information online, so I'm not sure. If he didn't know and found out, how do you think he would have responded to it? Also, how do you think Vader would react if he ran into Rex?" Okay, so I'll answer those questions in just a second, but I also think these questions lead to another really interesting one, or perhaps I should say a really intriguing possibility that I'll talk about afterwards. Something pretty monumental Rex may have done or played at least a part in. But anyway, to start it off, I think that, sadly, Vader likely wouldn't have any reaction to seeing Rex again. Or perhaps I should say, if he encountered him and knew he was essentially a traitor to the Empire, he'd just kill him and that'd be that. And even if Rex knew it was Anakin behind the mask and tried to appeal to his better nature, he still ends up dead, and probably even quicker in that scenario. Vader certainly doesn't want to be reminded of who he once was and what he once had. He's kind of compartmentalized the two different sides of himself, or different lives he's led, which I think gets shown quite well in the book Thrawn Alliances, but that's a topic for another time, I suppose. However, here, if Rex did know what Anakin became, I almost think there's a chance it kind of breaks him. I think, as is heavily implied in Season 7 of Clone Wars, when Anakin worries Rex is being a bit impulsive or obsessive when it comes to Echo potentially still being alive and trying to find him, that in many ways Rex became the way he was because of Anakin, that he was sort of a hero and or role model to him, and that he picked up many of his traits along the way. Though all that said, I don't think we have any reason to believe Rex ever learned the truth about Anakin, even though, yes, there are certainly those who could have told him the truth. And do keep in mind, when it comes to the new canon, the galaxy does eventually learn the truth about Anakin being Darth Vader in the book Bloodline. It's basically used against Leia by a political opponent, and this all happens roughly 6 years before the sequel trilogy, or then 20 years after Return of the Jedi, when one would have to imagine Rex is no longer alive. That accelerated aging had, shall we say, caught up to him when you consider he ages roughly twice the normal speed, and he would have been around 60 years old at that point in time. But anyway, long before that, one who technically could have told him about Anakin was Ahsoka. There's every chance these two will have met again after Ahsoka learned the truth herself, which we see happen in Rebels. There's even a pretty good chance, I'd say, that we'll see these two meet again in the upcoming Ahsoka series. Though I don't know why she'd tell Rex what truly happened to Anakin, especially if she'd already learned the truth from Luke, that in the end, Anakin, yes, he did come back to the light side. And speaking of Luke and all that, this is where it gets interesting when it comes to Rex, because thanks to Rebels, or the Rebels epilogue at the end of the series finale, we have it confirmed that Rex was at the Battle of Endor, that he was among the Rebel Pathfinders that took part in the ground battle, that he was the character that used to be known as Nick Sant, that he's the old bearded guy at the Battle of Endor seen in Return of the Jedi, which, yes, does look a lot like Rex from Rebels. And so anyway, since this is all but confirmed now that Rex was at the Battle of Endor, that means he was on the shuttle Tydirium with Luke Skywalker before the battle. And there's got to be, I would think, a pretty decent chance that Rex was intrigued by the fact that there was this Jedi named Luke Skywalker on the mission with him. A Jedi that just so happened to have the same last name as the Jedi general and friend he served during the Clone Wars, that he may have asked if there was perhaps some kind of relation or connection to his former general. Not to mention, Rex did know something was going on between Anakin and Padme. We even see in Season 7 of the Clone Wars that he kind of stands guard for Anakin while he talks to her, that he once even stalled Obi-Wan while they were inside talking, which Obi-Wan basically called Anakin out for right in front of Rex in case there was any doubt Rex knew what Anakin was really doing in there.
I hope you at least told Padme I said hello.
In other words, it wouldn't be the biggest stretch ever to assume that Anakin may have somehow had a child with Padme, and this new Jedi with the same last name leading the rebellion, being as heroic as Anakin once was, just might be that child. The ages would even match up. And I'm not saying Rex would go up to Luke and ask that very question. Instead, he might simply say that he once served in Anakin Skywalker in the Clone Wars, and ask Luke if he had ever heard of him. And even if Luke didn't want to tell Rex that was my father, Luke, might still be interested in hearing some old war stories about his father from Rex, or just, wanting to hear stories about a Jedi who he used to serve with. Which is where the really interesting possibility comes into play, one not everybody may like or think is necessary, but it's interesting nonetheless. Which is that, for all we know, Luke, at that point, had never really heard any stories about Anakin, especially not first-hand accounts. Outside, of course, from Obi-Wan and Yoda, perhaps, who didn't seem all too keen or eager to talk about Anakin as far as we've ever seen, at least any sort of truth surrounding him, I should say. Now, sure, off-screen, while on Dagobah, it's possible Yoda told him stories about Anakin, or that Obi-Wan did at some point too, not that he had a ton of time to do that. And again, who knows how true any of it was, or how much truth in it Luke thought there was, considering what Obi-Wan had already lied about when it came to his father. And so here was someone who had served under Anakin, directly under him, and had absolutely no reason whatsoever to lie about him. And he's potentially telling Luke stories about how his father was a hero during the Clone Wars, and telling him this shortly after Luke was told by Yoda and Obi-Wan that he'd have to not only confront his father again, but that he'd basically have to kill his father to achieve victory. That's at least what Obi-Wan seems to imply here.
I can't kill my own father.
Then the Emperor has already won. You were our only hope.
And so perhaps Rex helped to put a different thought or possibility into his head. Perhaps Rex was part of the reason why Luke searched for good or conflict in his father, and indeed found it when confronting him. It could be that some of the wartime stories, or Clone War stories, weren't, I don't want to say what completely changed Luke's mind or gave him the idea to appeal to his father's better nature underneath the mask or the darkness, but it gave him hope that such a thing could actually work, that they had helped reinforce a belief in his father. And yes, I know some might not like that because they feel it's more powerful or impactful if Luke just developed this faith in his father all on his own, or that he looked for it and sensed it without in any way being prompted to look for it. That he came up with a better plan to stop the Sith, a more Jedi-like plan you could argue, than Obi-Wan and Yoda did, who seemingly had entirely given up on Anakin and thought the only way to stop Vader was to literally destroy or kill him. There will also be those who say that not only was Rex created way after the fact, long after the story was told in Return of the Jedi, and that even later still was this bearded rebel on Endor turned into Rex, making this again a retroactive thing that was in no way, shape, or form originally intended. And if that's how you feel about it, that's fine. But as someone who is a huge fan not only of Luke Skywalker, but of the themes of Star Wars and how they're shown in Return of the Jedi, who loves how brilliant of an ending that is in that film, I personally wouldn't have a problem with Luke hearing about the heroic deeds of his father from Rex right before the Battle of Endor, and that being something that, shall we say, cemented his plan to try to appeal to his father instead of fighting against him. Or that, in a way, it lent credence to what he was already feeling, this plan he had come up with to try to appeal to his father's better nature, that it could potentially work. I also like the idea that the goodness that was once inside Anakin, or the good man he used to be, had truly mattered or played some part in saving him in the end, that it had transferred through Rex, you could say. It's also an incredible end to Rex's story arc, even if he never truly or fully realizes, or even begins to realize, that he not only helped save his friend Anakin, but that all the long years of war he'd endured, including coming back to fight for the rebellion in his later years, that it played a huge part in ending the war once and for all, or for, at least a little while. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about this one. Is it possible Rex and Luke spoke right before the Battle of Endor, and that it had an influence on Luke or his actions going forward? Or do you think that's just a bad idea or not necessary? You can also ask a question for a future lightning response video by starting your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then asking away. Whatever you may choose to do, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.